I'm glad you didn't get a divorce, by the way. It's a great thing about not being president. You can say whatever you want. Of course, nobody cares what you have to say anymore, but you can say it at least. There was a great appreciation for individualism, a great belief in the power of free enterprise, and yet there was a certain communitarianism that persisted in this country that has been lacking in America, but has been building steadily there for the last 10 years. And communitarianism is neither left nor right. It just simply recognizes that we are mutually dependent on each other, that it is inconceivable that we can find personal or fulfillment or family success unless we have some concern and care for the general conditions under which we all live. And when people ask me to explain the results of the last election and the prophetic one that occurred in 2006, which basically predetermined how this one would come out, I said that we had become a more communitarian country. We hadn't necessarily moved left, we just decided we were going to move forward together. And I would like to make the argument today that that is basically the mission we have to undertake for the world. Now, in America, we call the far right the black helicopter crowd. They used to be convinced that the liberals in my country were in favor of the United Nations taking over the United States with an invasion of people in black helicopters. That's what that refers to. I'm not calling for world governance. I'm just saying that we have to have a world consciousness. And in the absence of it, we will not make good decisions. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that everything in the world should be solved in a multilateral way. Let me give you just one example. Today is World Food Day. And I'm sad that the donations to the World Food Program, because of the global financial crisis, are at their lowest levels in 20 years because there are a lot of hungry people out there. But I am heartened that in the last couple of years, the president of the World Bank, Robert Zoellick, not a member of my party, but a smart and able man, recognized that the world had made a mistake in 1981 when all of the wealthy agricultural producers, including the United States and Canada and Europe, led the world away from using foreign assistance to promote agricultural self-sufficiency in poor countries on the theory that the staples of life, wheat and rice, soybeans, corn, could be produced more efficiently in countries that had massive agricultural infrastructure and good topsoil, and therefore it was possible for people in poor countries to just skip the agricultural stage of their development and move right into some sort of industrial age and just get their food from somewhere else, which they could buy cheaper than they could grow. And this view persisted among policymakers for 25 years or more. Parenthetically, it also made a lot of money for the farmers in the United States, Canada, Europe, and elsewhere. And they did do a good job, but it led to some bizarre developments. For example, most of you probably know that every couple of years there's a famine in the Horn of Africa, which begins in Ethiopia, eastern Ethiopia, and we all have to rush to give more food aid. I work in Ethiopia now. We have 166 people working there, building out health systems so that our AIDS program and anti-malaria programs and maternal and child health programs will actually work. And a couple of years ago, I was there flying out into rural areas looking at the clinics that our foundation has helped to set up. And everywhere south of Addis Ababa, the capital, which is slightly east of center in the north of Ethiopia, and west, there was a bumper crop. And yet, 2 months after I got home, there's another fire alarm for food for the Horn of Africa. Why? They had no means of storing the crop. They had no transportation mechanisms. They had no distribution mechanisms. No one had ever helped them to build the infrastructure of a modern food chain that would have provided food by and large organically grown, locally grown, would have contributed to the income of farmers where in the villages where a lot of this food was grown, they grew far more than they needed for their own consumption. And so at the end, everybody was out here riding to the rescue. Now, Canada deserves a great deal of credit, I might add, for changing its policy on food aid. Yours used to mirror ours, and we used to both require that food aid came from food grown by our farmers and delivered, so that our taxpayers were at least paying for our own food. And it helped to support high production levels and reasonable prices. But the food took too long to get too far, it was too expensive, and it did nothing to support development. So now you spend about half your food aid buying the food grown next nearest the crisis. And I applaud you for that. For all of our disagreements, President Bush, I think, deserved a lot of credit when he proposed that at least 25% of America's aid be delivered in the same way you deliver half of yours. And he was defeated by this overwhelming bipartisan consensus of special interest in Washington. I was virtually the only Democrat who was on his side. There we were. We disagreed on everything. We finally agreed on something, and we got our brains beat out. But I say that because now that I am doing the work I do now, when we undertook to do development projects in Africa and Latin America, it became clear to me that the whole thing was a fool's errand unless we increase people's capacity to feed themselves, to store food, to transport food, to work out delivery mechanisms, to have an efficient supply chain. Farmers are good everywhere. They know what they're doing, and they know how to take care of the soil. It's the structure of feeding people. What happens, and whether you get good seed and whether you have adequate fertilizer and all of that, that holds it up. I say that because on this World Food Day, if part of the mission of McGill is sustainability, there is no better place to start. And it is now a necessity. In the last 10 years, with the world population growing, the only places on earth where grain yields per acre increased significantly were in Brazil and Argentina, the only places left on earth with more than 20 feet of topsoil to farm on. And even there are constraints to how much yields can further increase. So when it comes to having a communitarian outlook and being committed to sustainability, on Food Day, we should say we're glad that Canada and the United States have great farmers and lush land and the capacity to feed much of the world. But we know in our heart of hearts it would be better if more people could feed themselves. Then when we give food aid, we'll know it's an absolute necessity, and they'll know we still want them to have the dignity and the self-respect of being able to maximally support themselves wherever they are. Which brings me to the larger point. The reason that a communitarian consciousness is needed in the world today is that the whole world is interdependent to an extent it has never been before. Before World War I,